The auxiliary has an interesting history, which I will probably make much too short for what it's worth. They started out as the Coast Guard's reserves, but not as we understand the term reserves. During World War II, there were people who wanted to serve and could not serve for many reasons. They offered their services to the Coast Guard as volunteers, many with their own boats, for the specific purpose of going out and protecting our shores against German submarines. Eventually there was a Coast Guard auxiliary formed, but these are the forebearers. Thank you. During World War II, the Coast Guard operated or owned 400 cutters and 4,000 small craft, which included everything from cabin cruisers to fishing trawlers. They manned 351 Navy ships, including 30 DEs like the Slater. Hence, this is a proper venue for this. 288 Army vessels. Some of their credits go rescuing over 25,000 people from ships that were sunk during the war. 1,400 Allied soldiers were saved by the Coast Guard small boats off of Normandy on 6 June 1944, when their landing craft were sunk. Coast Guard dates back to 1790. It became the Coast Guard in 1950 and under legislation passed by President Wilson. It was an amalgamation of many services and agencies. The Revenue Cutter Service, the Life-Saving Service, the Lighthouse Service, the Steamboat Inspection Service, and many others. Both during World War I and World War II, the Coast Guard was transferred operationally over to the Navy. In fact, the Coast Guard was involved in World War II before most of the rest of the U.S. military were. In May 1940, after Norway and Denmark had been overrun by the Nazis, there was a great concern about the protection of Greenland, which was a source of cryolite used in making aluminum, and a place where all weather that affected Europe would start out. The Danish government in exile negotiated with President Roosevelt that the United States would kind of take over as the police force for Greenland. Guess who they sent? You see, the Coast Guard is the only one of the 5 military services that, due to its origins under the Treasury Department, has the power to enforce laws. Their time in Greenland had actually started after the Titanic disaster. The Coast Guard became the basic foundation around which the International Ice Patrol was established. There was a commander, a salty sea dog by the name of Edward Iceberg Smith, who was an oceanographer and who was charting all around Greenland. Admiral Stark, the chief of naval operations, sent Commander Smith a message saying, "Go up to Greenland and see what you can do. Do a little of everything, because the Coast Guard is used to that." The question came up was, well, we're not at war. What do we do if we find Nazi agents, especially meteorologists there? The reply was, well, you've got the power, arrest them for trespassing. They did. Both the Germans and the Coast Guard. The Germans tried to establish weather stations, and the Coasties arrested them. In May of 1941, the cutters Northland, Modoc, and General Green were searching for survivors of a ship that was torpedoed off the Greenland coast. Suddenly they found themselves in the middle of the great epic naval battle. Both the British and the Bismarck of the German Navy decided that these ships must have been the enemy. Bismarck actually fired on the Modoc, but fortunately their aim was poor. The British sent out aircraft to attack the cutters, but fortunately they were identified before the attack was carried out. During World War II, coasties operated landing craft at every amphibious operation there was. This dated back to the late 1930s, when during exercises the Navy and the Marine Corps realized that they did not have enough small boat handlers to effect proper amphibious assaults. The legend is that some Marine officer said, well, why don't we invite the Coast Guard to this, because they operate small boats all the time. Coasties ran small boats from Guadalcanal to Okinawa and everything in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Mediterranean in between. Destroyer Escort 319, the USS Leopold, was one of 30 DEs that had Coast Guard crews. She was torpedoed and sunk south of Iceland on 10 March 1944. She lost 90% of her crew. Most of them died from hypothermia. During the Korean War, 12 destroyer escorts were actually transferred to the Coast Guard, painted white and used as weather patrol ships.
Now it's a very real pleasure for the USS Slater to fire a ball with 3 shots from our 3-inch 50 in honor of our Coast Guard shipmates on this very special day. Immediately following the volley, the Coast Guard song Semper Paratus will be played. Will all those who are able please stand? Mr. Collin, when the gun crew is ready, please fire. All uniformed personnel and veterans, and salute. From our 3-inch 50 in honor of our Coast Guard shipmates on this very special day. Immediately following the volley, the Coast Guard song Semper Paratus will be played. Will all those who are able please stand? Mr. Collin, when the gun crew is ready, please fire. All uniformed personnel and veterans, and salute. brief history of the service, along with recognizing Coast Guard veteran volunteers and other Coast Guard veterans present.
Well, one of the purposes of Coast Guard Day here at the Slater is to recognize the Slater's Coast Guard veterans who are volunteers. Slater's Coast Guard veteran volunteers go from World War II veterans to Vietnam era veterans. I will ask them to stand. Hold your applause until we are done with the list. Joe Burke, Doug Tanner, Gene Jackie, there he is, he just arrived. Nelson Potter, Rich Pavlovic. Okay, he's not here. Grant Hack, and myself. Thank you, Coast Guard veterans who volunteer at the Slater. We have representatives of the Coast Guard Auxiliary here.